So we start looking ahead to, all right, what are the, we're talking about their salary cap situation, which currently is not good. They're one of 5 teams over the cap, and we're looking at obvious contracts with Geno, with DK, with Tyler Lockett, that something will be done on some level with those, we assume. But before we get into all that, let me just ask you about the draft and Seahawks sitting there at 18. They've got a tremendous need on the O-line, but the one thing, Eric, this team has shown year in, year out, and I don't know that this philosophy changes, is that they just go with the best player, regardless of position. So if they see a defensive tackle sitting there at 18 that on their board is the best player available, even though they've got a dire need at O-line, they're going to go with that defensive tackle. What do you think of that philosophy?
Yeah, no, it's interesting, right? I mean, you could say like Byron Murphy this year, right? How did he, fare not that well, but not also didn't really have much of an opportunity in some cases. So, yeah, I think that kind of applies to what you're talking about. And, these things typically do pay off in time, right? For instance, think of it. I always tell people to think of it this way. If I were to do a redraft of, let's say, the 2019 draft right now, I'd be pairing the best players to this point, what we've seen in the NFL, virtually regardless of positional need, right? I mean, we would say, hey, the Titans could use this, this team could use that. You're just kind of slotting the best talents, even if guys were drafted in round 4. The point being, 2 years down the road, the positions that aren't your strengths right now could be some of your strongest ones. Those things kind of cycle through and change pretty often. So on the whole, I defend that theory. But then again, there are instances when talent isn't necessarily maximized, or you don't always have the right kind of succession plan at certain positions. So I think there's got to be a little bit of a balance between the two.
Yeah, Eric, if we are going with the assumption that, okay, this time the Seahawks might take an offensive lineman or will take an offensive lineman with that first pick, are there any guys that have kind of stood out to you right away, or any guys that maybe later in the draft they could use as well that really would be good fits for this team?
Yeah, and I'm going to Mobile on Monday, and that'll kind of help reset the boards a little bit with all the practice and everything. But, right now I think you'd say the strength of this class is on the interior versus the tackle position. But I'll kind of say that with an asterisk. I mean, there are some college tackles who some NFL teams are projecting inside. That may vary club to club, benchmark to benchmark. What do they care about? Arm length, height, weight, whatever, footwork. I mean, that all matters. But that said, I think in that kind of mid-first round range, depending on whether one or two get kind of pushed up the board or not, we didn't really see much of Ohio State's Josh Simmons. He could go anywhere from, maybe the top 10 to the bottom of round 1. We got to see what his health is. Kelvin Banks from Texas, Josh Connerly from Oregon. I'm sure a lot of people up that way are familiar with him. He's really kind of risen. He'll be in Mobile. Tyler Booker's another one I like. And Donovan Jackson, too, who filled in for Simmons for Ohio State. If you watch the playoff run of the national title game, doesn't look like your typical left tackle, but played really well out there, and I think could play any of the 5 positions. So that's kind of a fun projection. I think he's probably more day 2, but a player that I think, could be in the role for a starting bid next year somewhere.
So looking at the interior, and you just mentioned a couple names, and let's say the Seahawks are there at 18 and they do elect to go with an interior guard or maybe a center. We're not sure how they feel about Oluwatimi, but guard is definitely of need for this team. Is there one name you look at and say, man, if this guy is available at 18 and you have the need that you have on the line, you'd be foolish not to take him?
Yeah, one guy I didn't mention because I don't think he'll be there is Will Campbell from LSU. He's their left tackle. A lot of people feel like his arm length is going to come in a lot, shorter than you typically see in a left tackle. But, everything else kind of passes the test to me. From the second he started the first game of his career, he looked like he belonged, and I think has progressed since then. So that's one that, boy, if he gets dinged by a number of teams for not sort of being positionally correct, I guess, I'm not sure what the right term is for that, but doesn't sort of fit their typical parameters, or they don't want to take a guard that high, that's one you jump all over, but I suspect he'll be probably out of the mix. So, again, it probably comes down to whether teams are projecting guys like Banks to be either an interior guy or an exterior guy. Same thing with Connerly. I think he's a tackle, but again, that debate could exist. Another one, Armand Membu from Missouri. Sort of doesn't have typical right tackle build from a height perspective, but I think the arm length is going to be fine. And I think the weight will hold up too. He's just kind of a differently shaped guy. But man, he had some eye-opening tape this year too. That's another one where I think he'd be all right inside, but I think you could also try him to tackle, and he might be in that mid to late first round range.
Eric, you said the name Will, and then that jogged to my mind. Will Howard, and I know you kind of wrote about some of those guys in the national title game. We have kicked around the idea of what's the QB succession plan, whether it's this year, whether it's the next few years, the Seahawks. What do you think of Will Howard's draft stock, and can you kind of project what his pro potential might be like?
Yeah, and just sort of big picture, you got me thinking. I kind of wonder if this isn't the year where you're better served to be in the kind of position where you don't need a quarterback, but if there's one you like, you draft them, and you might be able to get somebody pretty decent, from, say, the mid-third round to the mid-sixth round, right? Because I think there'll be a drop-off. There'll be those kind of top two guys, Sanders and Ward, and maybe Milroe or somebody else joins them. I don't know what to think of Quinn Ewers yet, but, when you get down to that group, the next tier, I think Will Howard's pretty close to the top of that group. And again, I'm probably talking day 3. That's just me, but maybe my conversations are changing as I get, in front of more scouts this next week. And, you saw an interesting game from him. He ran a lot more than you normally see from him, but he's got power. He's a big frame guy, has played some big games, whether it was at Kansas State before he came to Ohio State. And obviously this year after the Michigan game, he was terrific. So, I still think there's some, some things that need to be kind of rounded in form with his game. But, he showed some guts in that one and hit a deep ball late and looked like a very interesting sort of developmental quarterback, I guess.
How shallow is this quarterback class? In talking about the potential of Geno moving on, if they trade him, whatever happens, and you start looking at the draft. Yeah. This, by everybody's estimation, talking to guys like you that really follow it and analyze it, it doesn't seem to be a draft class for quarterbacks that anybody's going, you'd be lucky to get this guy or that. I mean, I was just reading somebody tweeting about Shedeur Sanders saying he'd have the least arm strength of any starting NFL quarterback athletically. He'd be in the bottom half of starting NFL quarterbacks, doesn't deal with pressure well, big name, but not a legit first-round prospect. He's the second quarterback I hear behind Cam Ward. So is he? A, do you agree with that assessment? And B, who else outside of Cam and Shedeur should people be talking about?
Yeah, that's maybe a little harsh for me, but I think they raised some of the right points, which is that he's really not a special athlete. He's not his dad, right? I don't expect a punt returner at quarterback when you watch him for the first time. He's more of a kind of a measured precision passer, if you will. I think he throws really well in rhythm. The arm strength question, I think, is legit. But I've also seen him uncork a few balls, especially when he kind of gets on the move a little bit. When he opened up his creativity a little bit, colored outside the lines, and started creating a little bit more this year, some of it last year out of necessity, like he was under crazy heavy fire. I can't even look at that tape because I don't know what to make of it. It was terrible. But he still avoided interceptions. He still threw the ball where it needed to be a lot. And then this year, I felt like he kind of sped up his process, didn't take as many sacks. O-line helped, but still, I mean, there's a lot to like. Do I look at him and say, surefire, top 3 or 4 in the pick in the draft? Not really. That's just me, and I don't really see the same level with Cam Ward either. So I think we're forcing it a little bit with these guys, and they both have traits that I think can translate into a starting role, but I just think we have to measure our expectations. Like I mentioned Ewers, I've struggled to really kind of fall in love with the guy, and I think he has a lot of things that'll go over well in the NFL, and I think some other things that won't. So it's kind of like that with almost everybody. But again, I think I almost like some of the dart throws, the Max Brosmer from Minnesota, 1 year at FBS ball, and maybe he's kind of a hidden gem, or maybe Dylan Gabriel's been oversold because of his height, or undersold, I should say. So I don't know. I'm still developing some of my thoughts on this class as we go, but there's a lot to be figured out here.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll develop as well, as you mentioned, when you get down to the Senior Bowl. And I know we're months out, but as Bob said, this is the area of interest and intrigue out here, especially.
No doubt.
When you look at a wide receiver class, and it has some top-end talent, and, out here we have kind of kicked around the idea of what a post-DK Metcalf future looks like, or eventually what the Seahawks might have to do. What does the wide receiver depth look like to you so far?
Yeah, I think I like the depth a little bit better than I like the top end talents. Travis Hunter was a great receiver in college. Who knows if he'll be more of a corner in the NFL. T-Mac from Arizona. Wish he would take over games more, but first round prospect. I would say same with Luther Burden. They had trouble getting him the ball at Missouri this year. So, those higher end guys, even Emeka Ebuga from Ohio State, to me doesn't scream first rounder at all, but all are, I think, going to be very good pros. So you see more of that in this class than you do the spectacular talent. So I think there is some depth, but it depends on kind of what you want. Slot guy like Xavier Restrepo, I think could play in this league, a decade and do really well for himself. Ricky White III from UNLV is my sleeper guy. I'll kind of pound the table for him in a variety of roles. Trey Harris from Ole Miss is going to be at the East-West Shrine game, one of their best receivers they've had. Who's actually, I think, going to practice down there. And, again, they're all kind of could-be's and maybes. And then past years, I feel like we've had more established high-end talent and then also more depth as well. So Senior Bowl is going to be big for the receivers because there really isn't that one guy who just stands out on paper where you go, okay, that's the guy I'm going to follow around all week. It's really kind of a grab bag right now, and it's a great opportunity for, 2 or 3 to shine, I think.
What would you do if we put you in the GM role? John Schneider's not there. You're now in charge of the Seahawks, and you've got the second biggest cap hit on this team behind Geno currently is DK Metcalf. Both guys are going into the final year of their deal, so this is typically when an extension would happen, but there's debate. Hey, DK's not worth it. He is worth it. He takes, he garners all this attention from the defense, opens up things for other people. He's remarkably durable. He's missed, I think, 3 games in 6 seasons. You just don't see guys with that build, that speed, but maybe he's not as good as we think, or he hasn't been utilized. There's all kinds of conversation. What would Eric do? What would you do if it were up to you? Would you extend him, or would you be looking, all right, I need other things more than I need him, so I'm going to trade him for draft capital?
Yeah, first I think I would just try to do as much cleanup of the other contracts as possible, right? If see what we can do with, I think Leonard has a big number. Obviously, he's one of your best players, but, Draymond Jones and I'm trying to think, like Noah Fant probably has a decent one.
Yep.
And other guys like that where you kind of say, hey, can we restructure this and see how much we have to make up? How much we're still in the hole, how much cap space do we need to be prior to whatever date they set? But it's a tough call. I agree with all the things you said. There have also been some emotional moments and some moments where he hasn't stepped up his game in big times. And so, you're left a little bit conflicted, but man, it would be so hard to give up on that kind of talent. And, as many riches as we've had cycle through the draft, and obviously DK slipped to 64th pick or whatever it was.
Yeah, end of the second.
Yeah, you can sometimes hit those. You don't really hit quarterbacks that often. You don't hit pass rushers that often, but receivers, running backs, even, some offensive linemen, sometimes you get lucky in the draft that way. So I'm a little conflicted. I would have to also get a decent amount back if I was going to look to trade him or something. I wouldn't want to be the guy who lets him go for, the same spot he's drafted in or something like that and feel like I came out on top in the deal.
Eric, is there, in your opinion, a good fit at offensive coordinator for what the Seahawks want to do? They were so pass-heavy last year, and then it didn't work out with Ryan Grubb. But out of some of the names we've heard, and maybe ones that we don't know, is there a balance or someone that you think, okay, this is what this team needs in their offensive coordinator position?
Yeah, it's going to be hard for me to go all through the list or anything. I don't have it in front of me. But one name that really kind of stood out to me, and I know they've already been robbed from 3 different assistants. I can't imagine what Dan Campbell's reaction would be if a 4th one went. But Hank Fraley, who runs their offensive line. It wouldn't necessarily be a traditional pick by league standards, but personally, I don't think the Seahawks would care about that. From everything I've heard, Fraley is a savant, like a football genius, and somebody that the players obviously respect. I talked to him years ago when he was a player, kind of commanded things in the O-line room, and it seems to be doing the same thing as a coach, but it's also his creative run game design that I think a lot of people have taken notice of. And I don't know. I mean, obviously Grubb was sort of a traditional hire. I mean, if Mike McDonald wants to become this Baltimore West thing, I guess, that would be the kind of guy I would maybe look to.